This tutorial is an introduction to the basics of character modeling and skinning a character to the biped in 3ds Max. So I'm starting in a new scene, and I'm just going to double check that my system units is set up properly. So system units, I'm working in inches, and I'm using US standard feet with fractional inches, and the default units is feet. So I'm going to start out with a box, and I'll make my box 4 feet by 4 feet. I'm going to switch out to shaded view and turn on edged faces and add in 4 segments in each direction. So I have a box that looks like this. So we're going to be creating a very basic character, a ball shaped character. And so basically we're going to be spherifying this box and extruding arms and legs from it, and that's going to be our character to start. So this character will be symmetrical, so we only need to model half of the character at a time, and then we can just mirror the other half over when we're done. So we've created this box, and I'm going to go up to the Modify panel and add the Spherify modifier. And that takes the box and turns it into a sphere. And this is what we're going to start modeling our character from. If you'll notice the way the edges flow around this sphere, this will make it easier for us to extrude and subdivide this mesh. If I draw a sphere beside this, you can see how all the edges come to a point at the top and the bottom of the sphere. So every time we subdivide this, we're going to have this massive dense geometry at the top and the bottom that we really can't work with. This is why we create the box with the 4 edges in each direction, so that when we spherify, it takes all those edges and wraps it around in a sphere shape nicely so that we can start modeling. So I'm going to take my box object that is now spherified, and I'm going to right click on the select move tool and make sure it's centered, and I'm going to go to my front view, and I'll right click, convert to editable poly, and I'm going to delete half the faces. So now with half of this deleted, I'll go up to mirror, and I'll mirror an instance. I'm mirroring an instance. This way, anytime anything I do to this side now will update on the new instance. So this is mirror modeling. So I'm going to model on one half and it will update on the other. And then when I'm done modeling, I can attach them together and weld the seams. So the first thing I'll do is extrude some arms, and to do that I'll take, by holding Control, I'm going to select these 4 faces on the side of the character, and I'm going to use inset, and I'll inset the amount to be roughly the width we'd want the arm to extrude from, and then I'll click OK. So the next thing I'm going to do is extrude. So I'm going to use the extrude tool, and I'll extrude out to where the elbow should be, and then I'll hit the plus sign, which is apply and continue, and that will extrude out to where the wrist should be, and then I'll hit apply and continue again, and this time I'll pull back a bit. This is going to be the hand section. So we've blocked out the arm. So I'm clicking OK. You'll notice as I extruded, it took the form or the shape of the side of the body, and now my edge loops here are not straight. So I'm going to straighten those out by going to the front view, and I'll just grab all the vertices around that edge loop, use the scale tool, and just scale them in so that they're flat. So if you hit Alt-X, that puts the object into see-through mode, and you should be able to see through to the back, and you can see I've successfully scaled all the vertices together. So I'm going to name the character before I continue. I'm just going to call this character. And the next thing I'm going to do is add in or select my edge loops and chamfer them. So this edge loop here where the elbow would be, I'm going to loop and select the entire edge loop, and then I'm going to use the chamfer tool, and I'll chamfer this out with 2 edge segments. So it's creating a new edge segment on either side of the original edge loop, and I'm just going to space them out a bit, something like this. This will become important later when we add the skin, because these new edge loops are adding vertices that the skin will be able to control. So when we have an upper arm bone and a forearm bone, we'll be able to use these extra vertices to control how the skin is deforming when it creases at the elbow. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to do the same thing around the shoulder. So I could grab one of these edges here and loop and do a similar chamfer. And I'll just keep that a bit tighter. But again, this is going to give us extra vertices to control any of the pinching that happens as the arm bends at the shoulder. So I'm clicking OK. And I could do the same thing at the wrist. So the keyboard shortcut for loop is if you select one edge and hold Shift, and then select the next edge beside it in the loop, it'll continue the loop around the object. And click OK. So if I look at my hand section, I'm going to want to divide the hand section up so that it can bend properly. So the first thing I'll do is add in a new edge loop, and I'm selecting all the edges wrapping around the hand, or I could select one and click on ring, and then I'll hit connect to connect a new edge up the middle. So now I can use these faces here to extrude a thumb. Click OK. And for this thumb to bend, I'm going to need another edge loop in here. So I'm going to hold Shift in a ring selection and connect a new edge loop. So this would be the knuckle for the thumb. So I'm going to take the two faces on the front of the thumb and scale them down to taper the end of the thumb. And what we're creating here, we're going to create a really basic hand. It's just going to be in the shape of a mitt. So I'm selecting my edge loop and I'm going to scale this down a bit as well. And I'm just forming it to look like a thumb. So I could also chamfer this section here where the knuckle would be. So I have more control over how this section is going to crease when it bends with the bones. So I'm going to hit chamfer. Just chamfer it about this amount here and click OK. And again, if I wanted to, I could also chamfer this section in here. So I'd have to go around and select all the edges. And we'll see what happens when I hit chamfer. See how it splits those vertices out? So we actually don't want that, so I'm going to hit cancel. And instead, to deal with this section here, all I'm going to do is cut in one new edge loop. So I'm selecting a ring of edges at the back of the thumb, and I'll connect one new edge loop in and just slide it back towards the hand and click OK. So this will give us a bit more control over the skin when it bends the thumb section. So we have our hand out to here and our thumb. So I'm going to select the end four faces on the hand and do one more extrusion. And this will be where the fingers would be. But again, we're doing this in the shape of a mitt to keep it simple. So I'll click OK. If I hold Shift, I can select my edge loop in the middle of the hand and chamfer. So this way I'll be able to crease the hand when it bends. Click OK. So we've blocked out an arm and a hand. We have chamfered edge loops at the elbow, the wrist, in the middle of the hand where the hand will bend, and also back at the shoulder. So at this point I'm going to start forming the hand and the arm a little bit better. And before I do that, I'm going to add the Turbo Smooth modifier on top. So with the Turbo Smooth modifier on top, now I can see what my end result is going to look like when the model is subdivided using Turbo Smooth. So if I want, I can go back down to Editable Poly and I can turn the Show End Result On-Off toggle switch on or off. If I turn this on, it shows the Turbo Smooth. It'll show anything on the stack above Editable Poly. And then when I go to Edit, it shows an orange wireframe cage around the model. So that's the low poly mesh showing underneath TurboSmooth, and that's what I can select to edit. So I'm still working on the low poly mesh, but you can see it updating with TurboSmooth on top. So what I'm going to do next is attempt to round out this arm, because with the TurboSmooth on you can see it's kind of square. And to round this out, I'm just going to go around and pull out these flat sections on the top, side, and bottom of the arm. So if I just grab the edges along the top of the arm, and if I toggle my TurboSmooth on, I can see how it's going to affect it as I pull the edges up. And now it starts to round out the top of the arm. So I'll just carry on around the arm and finish that up. So I'll go to the side. So I'm just going through and individually selecting the edges I want to pull out. If I hit loop, it's just going to wrap around the entire model. So I'm just holding Control. If I accidentally select an edge, I can hold Alt to deselect. And I'm using the Select Object button rather than the Select and Move tool to carefully select edges without accidentally moving them out of position. You can see if I have the Select Object, I can't accidentally move anything. If I'm using Select and Move, I could grab something and accidentally move it. So now I'm just going to do the bottom. And that's it. So the next thing I want to start to do is taper in the elbow section and try to form this arm a bit better. So I'll taper in the elbow, I'll taper in the wrist, and then I'll start to form a better shape on the hand. So I'm going to start from back here at the elbow. And the first thing I'm going to do is select this edge loop. So I'm holding Shift and selecting the edge loop. So if I toggle on TurboSmooth, I still have my edge loop selected, and I'm going to use the scale. So I'm using Select and Uniform Scale, and I'm scaling in my Z and Y axis just by placing the cursor in between the two axes and scaling in. So now you can see I get a taper. So that pinches in where the elbow would meet. And I'll do the same thing at the wrist. So I just selected the edge loop. I'm going to use Scale. I'll toggle on TurboSmooth. And we'll just taper this in. So here in this case I'm also going to select this edge loop here and taper it down as well. So now you can see a forearm taking shape here. If you want, you can add in an extra edge loop here to create a bicep that you can control later. So to do that, I would just select all these edges and connect a new edge loop, which I'll make sure is in the center. And then I'm going to grab the vertices and just scale them so that they're flat. If I go to my front view, you can also scale out the vertices around the shoulder to make sure that they're flatter. So if you want, you can switch to wireframe mode to make it easier to select. Keyboard shortcut for that is F3. And I'll just see how that looks with Turbo Smooth on. So now where I've cut in a new edge loop for the bicep, I can take that edge loop, toggle Turbo Smooth on, and scale the bicep out. So now I'm going to move on and finish shaping up the hand. So I'm going to start with the hand by selecting these edges on the bottom here that are sticking out, because I know I want the bottom of the hand to kind of cup in a bit. So if I select those edges and turn my Turbo Smooth back on, I'll just start by pulling those edges up into the hand. And I'm also going to want the end of my hand to kind of taper together. So again, I can grab these faces on the end and I could scale them down like this. And if I want to continue to taper this back, I could just grab each edge loop and kind of taper the hand in like this. And if I snap to my front view, I could grab some vertices from the bottom and just start pulling the bottom vertices up like this. So you can shape this hand any way you want, just by pushing and pulling groups of vertices around. So if you're grabbing the bottom and middle groups of vertices, just try to make sure that you're keeping clean geometry in here. Make sure that your edges are flowing nicely through here. You don't want to start pulling these things all over the place like this and getting sloppy geometry. It'll be much harder to deal with when we're using skin if you have vertices all over the place. Try to keep everything clean. Same thing goes for texturing. When we unwrap this character, it'll be much nicer to unwrap and texture if our edges are flowing nicely around the model. So just from the front view here, I'm going around and inspecting parts of the hand and just pushing and pulling vertices, trying to shape the hand a bit better. could actually grab this whole section with the thumb, and if I go to wireframe mode, you can see I've grabbed this whole square section of the thumb here. I could start to kind of move this up. I'll actually grab it from the bottom half. So when I see something like this here, where everything's not straight, I'm going to investigate that. I'm going to have a look and see why isn't this section straight. So in this case it's okay because it's just going with the curve of the thumb that I'd put in initially. So I'm going to leave that section alone. But I am going to select right here where it pinches out, and I'm going to push this back so that I can clearly see my edge loop at the back of the thumb. So I'm going to try and not have any of my vertices overlapping. So if I toggle on Turbo Smooth, this is what it's looking like so far. So it's just a basic character to start with. It's just to make the your first attempt at skinning a little bit easier. So if you look here, the thumb is kind of square, just like when we first did the arm. So if you want to round out the thumb section, you can just go in, and just like we did with the arm, you can grab the edges along the side and kind of pull them out to round out the thumb. And if you can also add an edge loop along the top of the thumb. So if I ring the selection of edges here and hit connect, I'll connect one right in the middle, so everything is at 0 and one segment. And I can use this to also round out the top and the bottom of the thumb. So at this point, I'm just going to taper the end of this thumb in a bit more. And then I'm going to grab all the polygons for that thumb. And I kind of want to scale it down a bit. And I'm not going to spend too much more time on this thumb. So I could also rotate this whole section and scale it back and move it in. So looking at this from the front view now, you can see here my hand kind of arcs up because of the way I've gone through and modeled the hand. So I'm just going to select all the faces for the hand, and I'm going to slightly rotate the hand down and pull the whole thing down so that it's straighter in this section here. And I'm actually going to undo that. I'm going to do this from, I'm going to hit shrink and do this from this section here to start. So that's good enough for now. So that's the arm modeled in. That'll give us something to work with. So the next thing I'm going to do is extrude the legs, and we'll do the legs and the feet next. So at this point I'm going to hit save. Okay, so now we're going to do the legs. So I'm going to select the half of the character and drop down to editable poly in the stack. And I'm going to select by polygon. And I'm going to rotate underneath the model. If you need to hide your grid, G is the shortcut for turning the grid on and off. So I'm going to hide the grid. And I'm going to hold Control and select the 4 polygons directly on the bottom of the character, on this half of the character. And I'll do the same thing I did with the arms. I'm going to inset, and I'll inset the amount roughly that I want the width of the legs to be. So then I'll click OK. And you can see it's not perfectly straight. So what I could do before extruding the legs is go to Vertex, and there's an option in here. If you scroll down under Edit Geometry, there's a section for constraints. So if I turn on Edge Constraint, I can move the vertices along the edges on the mesh. So I'll just move this in, try to straighten out this square section here. And if you're thinking ahead, you'll remember how we had to go around the arms and pull out edges because it was square. So what I could do while I'm in here is try to make this more of a rounder shape. It'll save me from having to pull out all those edges later. So something like this. Try to make sure it's even on both sides. And even in the middle. Anyway, something like this. So then I'm going to select these polygons again, and I could do this two ways. I could extrude to the knee and then extrude down to the ankle and so on. But for this one I'm going to extrude all the way down to where the ankle would be this time. So something like this. Let's see. Then I'll click OK. And this time I'm going to move, oops, undo. So I want to move these faces in so that the legs are a bit straighter, but because I turned on constraints, I'm going to have to turn that back to none. So, want the bottom faces, so I'll move this in, and I can rotate this around so it's straight. And if I scale these faces in their local axis, I can flatten out the bottom. So now the bottom should be flat. So from here, with those faces still selected, I can extrude again about this amount here. For this is where I'm going to extrude the foot. So this extrusion would be for the width of the foot, because I'm going to extrude the foot section out from the two front polygons. So something like that, and click OK. And now for the knee section, all I have to do is either select all these edges around here or hold Shift and do a ring selection, or use the ring button, and hit connect. And as long as it's connected one segment in the middle, it should be lined up in the middle for your knee. So you might have to rotate this a little bit to straighten it out. And then I'm going to chamfer, just like we did for the elbow on the arm. I'm going to chamfer a section for the knee and click OK. And then up towards the top, I'm going to do a ring selection again, and I'll connect another edge which I'll slide towards the body and click OK. So this will give us more vertices for when the leg deforms as it moves with the biped. So I could do the same thing down here for the ankle. So I can connect another edge and this time slide it towards the ankle. Something like this. And while I have that selected, I'm actually going to scale. And you could scale on the local axis. And I'm going to scale the ankle section in. And if I toggle Turbo Smooth, I can see how that tapers the ankle. So that's the same thing we did with the wrist. And I could go up and do the same thing with the knee. And again, if you want to shape the muscle section in the upper leg, like we did with the upper arm, you can add in another edge loop. So I could just hold Shift, ring selection, and connect, and I'll make sure it's centered. Click OK. And with that selected, I'll toggle Turbo Smooth on and see as I scale this out. It just gives some bit of definition to the upper leg. So here we could go in and actually pull out some of these vertices here for the kneecap area. I've got these front 3 vertices selected, and I'll just toggle this on like this. So I'm just shaping and pulling these vertices around to just get kind of a kneecap area bulged out here. Even take the back section and push it in a little further. Let's grab these 3 verts here, toggle my Turbo Smooth. Just gonna push this in a bit. That's good enough for now. So now I'm going to extrude the foot. So I'm going to grab the 2 front faces here, or polygons, and I'm just going to extrude out to the end of the foot. So say something like this. Click OK. I'm going to have a look at the overall shape of the foot. I could just go around and pull some of these edges out, try to shape the foot a little better. If I go to my front view, you can actually grab all these vertices for the foot, and I'm just going to rotate the whole foot so that we're actually standing straight, flat on the foot. I could nudge this over a bit to keep the shin section straight. And I could actually go through each section here and scale the vertices together in the view axis, and that'll just make sure everything's flush on each of these rows of vertices here. Okay. So another thing with the foot is we'll probably want the foot to bend in here, so what I'm going to do is add another edge loop. So I'll do the ring selection, hold shift, connect. So I'm connecting straight in the middle. You could scale that flat, and also chamfer. So again, this is just like any joint where it needs to bend. We're just adding, we're chamfering and adding in the extra edge loops on either side, so that when this mesh deforms, we'll have more control with these extra vertices in here. And you'll understand that more when we get into skinning. So something like that should be fine. So if I toggle on Turbo Smooth, this is what the foot looks like. So one thing about Turbo Smooth is you'll notice the bottom of the foot is actually rounding the edge here. So it's actually forcing the bottom of the foot, where it looks like it's flat here, it's forcing this to blend with the side. So you can control the way this happens by setting some smoothing groups. So I'm going to turn on Polygon, and if you scroll all the way down, so this section here, Polygon Smoothing Groups, you can see it kind of looks like a calendar. So I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to grab all the polygons on the very bottom of the foot. And you can see here smoothing group 2 is grayed out, which means some of the faces I've selected are part of smoothing group 2 and some of them are not. So what I'm going to do is hit clear all, so none of these faces are part of any smoothing group, and I'm just going to assign them all to smoothing group 1. So the next thing I'll do is select all these polygons. I can hold shift and do a ring selection again. So any of the polygons touching the ones that I just put into smoothing group 1, I'm going to make sure that they're on a separate smoothing group. So these have no smoothing group, and I'm just going to leave it that way. So now when I go up to Turbo Smooth, you can see it's still trying to blend the bottom of the foot into the side of the foot. But you have an option here under Surface Parameters for smoothing groups. So if I turn this on, this tells Turbo Smooth to obey the smoothing groups that I've set in Editable Poly. So now everything on the bottom of the foot that was set to group 2 is only blending with other polygons that are in group 2. And they're not trying to blend in with any of these polygons on the side, which don't have smoothing groups assigned to them. So let's say this was like an egg character or something, and I wanted to treat his body like a shell and have this a hard edge in here. If I go back down to Editable Poly, I could select all the faces or polygons on the body. And you can see I've grabbed faces on the leg and arm. And if I just hit shrink, that'll shrink that back towards the body. And I'm actually going to deselect by holding Alt. So if you hold Alt, you can deselect individual polygons. So now if I take that whole body section of polygons and assign, say first of all I'll hit clear all, and I'll assign smoothing groups 4. As long as the arm isn't set to smoothing group 4 in here, which it isn't, when I go back up to Turbo Smooth, you can see it keeps a hard edge in here for us. So now the body is not trying to blend in to the leg or the arms. And you can see if I turn smoothing groups off here, it does try to blend. It tries to smooth the body into the arm and the legs. So I'm turning that back on, and now we're keeping a hard edge in there. So another way you can do this without using smoothing groups would be to physically add another edge close to the edge that is smoothing. So let's say I take this edge on the bottom of the foot, and I'll hold shift, and I'll just try to hold Control actually, and just using Control to select all the edges I can, and then Shift to do edge loops where I can. This doesn't create a complete edge loop. But if I chamfer this and keep that chamfer really tight, you can see when I go up to Turbo Smooth, even without smoothing groups on, it still keeps a pretty hard edge in there. But now I've added extra edges and extra polygons to the model. So a better way to do that would be to just divide the smoothing groups between the polygons. And then in Turbo Smooth, turn on smoothing groups. So I'm just going to go back to modeling the foot. I'm just going to make this into the shape of a shoe or something like that. So just go around and push and pull the vertices in and out until I get the shape I need. So that's good enough. It's a simple character. I'm not going to spend too much time modeling these things for now. So that's good enough for our shoe. So for the most part, that's it for modeling the character as far as the arms and legs go. If you want, you can go around and tweak things and straighten it up. But you can see here, I've just caught this out of the corner of my eye. This is a section where, because we've turned on smoothing groups, obviously the end of the hand had smoothing groups assigned that were different than the rest of the hand. So I'm just going to grab this whole hand section and clear all the smoothing groups off of it. So this way the whole hand smooths together properly with Turbo Smooth. In fact, I'll just double check the whole arm. Yeah, it looks like there's nothing else on there. So that's it. I'm going to save this and then we'll move on and we'll do a really simple face. Okay, so before I attach and weld the two halves together, I'm going to start working on the face. First thing I'm going to do is turn off Turbo Smooth. Just going to extrude an eye in here. So, I mean, I could take any polygon here and just extrude it in as an eye, but I'm going to take this whole section here and inset. So this is going to be my eyes right here. I'll just straighten this out before I extrude it. So again, I'll try and make this kind of round. Trying to keep the surface as straight as I can. I'll take those faces and extrude them in. You can also use bevel. So if I click on bevel, you can see I can do the height and the outline amount at the same time. So it's kind of like extruding and insetting at the same time. And if I toggle Turbo Smooth on, I can see the result of that. I can click OK for now. So you can see where I have different smoothing groups, so I'm going to fix that in a minute. So remember we assigned the body smoothing group 4, so I'm going to make sure that the eyes have the same smoothing group. So now this is what I get with the Turbo Smooth. So if you want, you can actually go in and change these smoothing groups inside the eye socket. So I'll change that from 4 to 5. And that'll keep a hard edge around the outside of the eye, if that's what you want. But instead of doing that this time, I'm going to actually put that back to 4. And instead I'm going to chamfer this outer loop. So I'll put in 2 segments and I'll chamfer it something like this. And click OK. And that'll just give me more control over the eyes later on. And I'm just going to pull this eye socket in a little deeper. So I could still straighten this out by selecting these edges in here, just moving the edges and making sure that this eye socket is fairly round. Okay, so that's good enough for the eye. And as far as symmetry goes, that's about as much as I'm going to do to this character. So the next thing I'll do is I'll create a mouth, but I'm going to do that after I attach the two sides. So now to attach the two sides, I'm going to select the first half I was working on and delete Turbo Smooth for now. I'll reapply that after. And I'll select the instanced half. If you're not sure which side was instanced, just select both halves. Hold Control and you can right click and convert to editable poly. So now I should be able to select one half, and in the modify panel click on attach and attach the other half. So now this has become one object. So the character is now one object, and if I select by element I can still select either half, and if I pull a half away you can see it's not welded in the middle yet. So I'll click undo and I'm going to go to my front view and select all the vertices down the center of the character, and you can see here it tells me I have 32 vertices selected. So when I hit weld, now I have 16 vertices. So you should see half the number of what you had selected before you hit weld. If you click on the settings button beside weld, you can adjust your threshold. So you can see if I crank this up, it's going to start reaching out to vertices that are further away. You can see as I get up to 2 or 3 inches. So I'm just going to hit X and cancel that. So once your vertices are welded, you can see that now when I select by element, it selects the entire character object. So now I'm going to model in a simple mouth, and I'll just grab these polygons here and I'll do an inset, something like this, and I'll do another extrude, or you can do a bevel. So I could adjust the outline amount and then extrude it back in and click OK. So then from the left view, if you want, you could go to wireframe mode and see I have the back of the mouth still selected, so I could grab this and pull it down like this. I could rotate it. I could scale it flat. I could also scale it down so that it tapers at the back. So if I go back to perspective view and out of wireframe, I can add an edge loop in the middle here. Select one edge, hold shift, and that does a ring selection. If I hit connect, it'll add one loop in the middle. I'm adding one segment, so then I could click OK. And you can see if I toggle Turbo Smooth on, which I haven't turned on yet, I'm going to add Turbo Smooth back in. And remember to turn on smoothing groups. So you can see it has separate smoothing groups at the back again, where we extruded the mouth. So what I'm going to do is go in and select, you can see when I select polygon I still have the back of the mouth selected, so I'll hit grow just out to the lips And then here I can change the smoothing groups again. So I'm just going to have the whole thing to 4, which is the same as the body. So if I toggle Turbo Smooth on, you'll see, or you should see it blend out. But if I go back, you can see this section here where I inset the lips was never assigned any smoothing groups, so I have to hold Control and select, or if I hold Shift, it'll ring a selection of faces and make sure that they're set to 4 as well. So now if I toggle Turbo Smooth, you can see it's trying to blend all these faces right around to the back of the mouth. And if I grab that new edge that I'd put in, this edge loop here, I can scale that part out. Just open up the inside of the mouth a bit. So that's good enough for now for this simple character. So he has eyes, he has a mouth, he has arms and legs, and he's all one piece. So the next thing we're going to do is set up the biped underneath him, and then we're going to use the skin modifier to attach the character to the biped. So I'm going to save this. Okay, so now we're going to set up the biped. So for the biped, we're going to go over to Systems, and under Systems you can find biped. So I'm going to click on biped, and I'm going to drag in the viewport to create the biped. And with the biped created, I'm going to go to the motion panel, and under biped I'm going to turn on figure mode. So figure mode is the editing mode for the biped. Whenever the biped is in figure mode, we can go in and edit, we can scale the parts of the biped, we can add parts to the biped. You don't animate when you're in figure mode. When it's time to do animation, you can turn figure mode off, and then you can turn on auto key and start animating the biped. So right now we're going to set up the biped, so we're putting it in figure mode. So the main bone object that controls the biped is this object here called BIP001. So if I have that selected, I can move the biped around. So I'm going to hit undo on that. I'm going to right click on the select and move tool and make sure that X and Y are set to 0. And this is going to put the biped in the center of the screen. So remember, I'm in figure mode, and I'm making sure that that BIP001 bone object is set to 0 and 0 in the X and Y axis. Now I'm going to go to the front view, and I'm going to select my character. I'm going to turn off Turbo Smooth. I'll make sure I have edged faces turned on. I'm going to hit Alt X to put the character into see-through mode. And if you right click on the character and go to Object Properties. We're going to uncheck Show Frozen in Gray and then click OK. This way I'm going to right click and freeze selection, and it's still in see-through mode instead of being shown in gray. So now I'm going to select all the biped parts, and I'm going to open up the Manage Layers button, and here in my layer manager I'm going to, with all the biped bones selected, and to be sure everything's selected, I'm actually going to right click and go to Unhide All, and this should unhide all the hidden controllers for the biped as well. And I'll make sure everything is selected again, and I'll click on Create New Layer, and this will drop everything I have selected into a new layer. So now I can name this biped, and you'll see if I click on the plus sign it drops down the list of everything in the layer. So if I look back in my default layer, I should only see character in here. You can see it's left behind biped footsteps. So if I select something out of a layer and right click on it, I can cut, and then I can right click on the layer I want to paste into. So I'm going to right click on the biped layer and paste the footsteps in here. So now if I want to hide the biped, I can just hide the entire layer, or I could go in and hide individual parts. So through here I can also select parts. So I'm going to find that BIP001 bone object. I'm going to right click and hit select, and now it's selected. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure the pelvis is lined up with the bottom of my character. So I'm just moving this straight up and down, and I'm making sure it's lined up. So here I can go into the motion panel, and you can see I'm still in figure mode. So now I can expand the structure tab. So you'll notice here under body type, I could have changed this to a male body, female, or classic. And for this I'm just going to stick with skeleton. And if I want to adjust the height, right here I can use the slider to adjust the height of the biped. So I'm actually going to line up the feet with the bottom of the feet on my character, because when I adjust the scale of the biped, it adjusts from the feet up. So now when I adjust the height, I'm going to make sure it's adjusted so that the feet are flush with the bottom of my character's feet. And I can check that better in the left view. So if I'm in this left view and I'm zoomed in and I want to lift the biped up, I could just right click on select and move and adjust the Z like this. Or you can zoom out and use the transform gizmo. So once the feet are in place, I'm just making sure that the height is adjusted so that the pelvis lines up with the bottom of the character. So something like this. Now from here I can go through and start adjusting all of the body parts. So something else to note with the biped is copy and paste. So you'll notice that half the bones are green and the other half are blue. So I could go in, because my character is symmetrical, I can just set up half of the biped and then I can copy and paste the posture of that biped to the other side. So the first thing I'll do is take this pelvis and I'm going to scale it out. And something else to note, when you're scaling bones or any part of the biped, make sure when you're scaling, so I've got the scale, the first selection and scale, if you hold your left mouse button down, you're going to make sure you're using select and uniform scale, not stretch and squash or anything else, just select and uniform scale. And I'm going to change from view to local. So now I'm scaling in the local axis of each bone. So scale in local, and I'm scaling the pelvis out until the legs line up with the center of the legs of my character. So something like this. And then I can go in and rotate. I'll be working on the green half of the biped, so I'm just going to ignore the blue half. So I'll rotate my legs so that they line up. So I'm trying to keep this all straight. And I'll just check in the front and in the left and make sure everything lines up. As you can see here, I have to rotate this back. So I want these bones running down the center of my leg. So now I can go through and I'll start from the upper leg, and I'll start in the front view, and I'm scaling in the local axis, and I'm just going to start scaling out each piece of the leg until it reaches the edge of the character mesh. It doesn't matter if it's sticking through a little bit, you just want to make sure it's close to the edge of your character mesh. So we'll do the foot. You can see at the end of the foot I have toe links. So if I go back to the motion panel under structure, you can see I have a section for toes, and right now it's set to 1, which is fine, and toe links, so I'm just going to have this set to 1 as well. So if I scale my foot out, I'm going to have this reach out to this edge loop where I wanted the foot to bend, and then from there to the end I'll scale out the first toe link. So that's where my foot's going to bend from, right here. So now I could scale this up. And the thing with digits like toe links and finger links, you can actually move these bones and place them where they need to be. So I can scale and move to fit that toe link. And the foot I'll just scale to make sure it's at the bottom of the mesh. I'll have to move the toe back in place. So then I'll go back up the leg again, and I'll scale out in the left view until each bone section is lined up close to the edge of my character mesh. So right now I'm just scaling locally in the y-axis, and I'll go back to the front view. You can see here I still need to scale that toe out. So if I look at this in perspective view, you can see we have all the leg parts scaled out to where they need to be. So now if I want to copy and paste everything I've done to this leg to the other leg, all I have to do is select all the pieces of the leg, so everything from the toe all the way back up to the upper leg, and I can go to copy and paste, and under copy collections here I'm going to create a new collection. So I'm clicking on the create collection button, and I'm going to name this leg. So now I have a collection that contains all the leg bones on the biped. So if I click on copy posture, you can see in here it highlights the selected bones, and now they're loaded in here once I've hit copy posture. So the next thing is to hit paste posture opposite, which is the third button over. So that'll take that and copy it to the other side of the biped. So once we've set up the arms, we'll do the same thing. We'll create a collection for the arms, and then we'll copy posture and paste posture opposite. So that takes care of the legs. The next thing to look at would be the spine lengths. So I'm going to look under structure, and for this character, because his body is his head, it's pretty much the same thing. We're not going to need the biped's head or neck. What we're going to do instead is we're going to use one spine length to control this whole section of the character. So under structure, under spine lengths, I'm just going to right click and reset this to 1. So you can see if I scale this out in the front view and go to the left view and scale it out. I'll also scale it up. And you can see what happens when I scale the spine length up. It takes the arms with it. So I'm actually just going to scale this so that this edge here is roughly with the center of my character. So the center of my character is running through this section of the spine. And then we'll deal with the spine again in a minute. So I'm not going to scale the spine anymore. I'm going to leave the spine the way it is. And because I'm not using the head or the neck, I'm going to select both pieces and I'm just going to scale them down out of the way. And for the arm, I'll grab the clavicle, and I can actually take that clavicle and move the whole arm over. So I want to line this up so that the shoulder lines up with the center of the character shoulder. And this character doesn't really have a collarbone or anything, so when we add skin, we're going to ignore the clavicle. But we'll leave it there for now. So that side of the arm is now lined up. I'm going to take each piece of the arm now and rotate it the same way we did with the leg. So I'm going to rotate it this way, and then I'm going to scale in the local axis until the elbow lines up, and then I'll scale again until the wrist lines up. And it looks good from this view, but I'm going to switch to top, and I can see from the top view I need to rotate that forearm. And now when I rotate the forearm to run down the center of my character's forearm, I can see I'm going to need to scale this wrist section back a bit. So something like this. And then I can take the hand, and I'm just going to scale the hand out to where the thumb lines up. So something like this. And I'll switch back to my front view. Just make sure that that lines up still. And maybe rotate it to go in the direction of the hand. So I'm just kind of following the center edge along the hand. So now if I go back to the motion panel and have a look at my links for the fingers, So right now I have one finger. I'm going to add another finger, which I'll use for the thumb. So this new finger will be for the thumb, and this finger here we're going to use for the end of this hand here. And I'm going to add another finger link, and then I'm going to scale these links out, and this is where the hand bends. So I'll scale the first link out, something like this, and then the second link to the end, and I'll rotate these up. So then I'm going to scale up in the front axis, and then I can check in the top view, and I can scale out just in the Z axis. Just make sure everything is lined up straight. So need to make sure I scale the hand out too, so this is gonna reach out to the edge of the hand, and then I'm gonna take that thumb and I can move the thumb into place. So I'm gonna move it over here and rotate it around, and I'm just going to make sure that it's running straight with the thumb on my character. So I'll switch to left view. You can see here I need to rotate, bring it up a bit, and I'll scale out the first digit until it meets the knuckle. And then I can scale out the end digit until it meets the end of the thumb. And then I'll rotate. So now I'm just going to scale this digit up in the left view, and this digit up. And I'll check in the front view. Make sure I scale them out to the edge of the mesh. And I'll just double check in the top view. So I'm always switching between my views to make sure everything is lined up. So you can see here I could actually move this whole thing over and rotate this. So the closer you line up the bones on the biped, the better the skin will take when we add the skin modifier. So I'm just going to go back and scale out the arms. So I'll do the forearm, and I'm in the top view. To the upper arm, and then I'll check again in the front view. You can see here when I scale the hand, it's moving the thumb. So I'm going to have to make sure I move the thumb back in place. So that's it for that arm, and it's pretty close. So now I'm gonna create a new collection again. So I'm selecting all these pieces all the way up to the clavicle. So make sure you hold Control and select all the pieces that you need. So here I can just grab, and you could also go up to select by name and make sure you have all the pieces you need selected. So you can see here I accidentally selected the neck. I'll just hold Alt. Oops. So I could even go through and pick these out individually. So I'm looking for right upper arm. If I hold Control, right hand, forearm, right fingers, right clavicle, and that's everything. So I click OK. So I have all the arm pieces on the right side selected. So I'll go back to copy and paste, and I'll create a new collection again, and I'll name this collection arm. Oops, make sure you have the name selected. And I'm going to click copy posture, and it should highlight all the bones selected. And then I'm going to hit paste posture opposite. And you can see if everything worked out, your other side should line up perfectly. So the last thing we need to deal with is the spine. So I'm going to select the spine link, go to the front view, and for the spine we're going to create a custom shape out of this spine bone. And to do that, we can go up to the modify panel. You can see when I have this object selected, it's called a biped object, and you always have to make sure that at the bottom of the stack any of your biped parts are still labeled biped object. If I right click and convert this to editable poly, it's going to lose its link information in the hierarchy of the biped, and it won't be part of the biped system anymore. So instead what we're going to do is add the edit poly modifier. So you can see I've added edit poly. So now I have all my options. I can go through and push and pull these vertices around, but it's still a biped object at the bottom of the stack. So you always have to make sure you add the edit poly modifier on top of the biped object. So now I'm going to select by vertex, and I'll just drag and select the top row, and I'll move them up to the top of the body. And I'll just drag and select the next row, and I'll move them up around here. You can grab this whole section at the bottom and move it down. Grab this first row here, just move it up and scale them out. And I'll grab this row in the middle and scale them out. So I'm just trying to shape the spine closer to the shape of the body. I'll just pull this right down like this. So if I switch out to the left view, and to do that, make sure you deselect vertex if you're using keyboard shortcuts, and then hit L to go to the left view. Make sure you just deselect the biped and then select it again. And I'll go back through and scale these out in the left view as well. So that would be good enough. But if you want, you could switch to perspective view and you can see where there's a few edges that could be pulled out. If you want to go through and pull those out, you can. You could just grab these edges here. Just hold Control and select the edges you want to pull out. Pull these vertices back in. But make sure you're pulling these out straight. So I'm just pulling these out in the y-axis. And that's good enough. So now, one of the advantages of having your biped shape closely resemble your character shape is if I open up the layer manager, especially if I had a dense character in here, if I hide the character, I could actually go ahead and animate the biped. And if I'm just doing a walk cycle or something, this is close enough to the character shape that I could probably animate the biped. And then when I unhide the character, I could tweak it from there. So one more thing I'll note about layers is right now I have the biped layer active with this check mark. If I start creating new objects while that biped layer is active, it's going to create all those new objects in that active layer. So this new box I created is now in that new layer. So make sure when you're using layers that you have the correct layer active when you're creating new objects. Otherwise you'll have to go through and right click and cut everything out and paste it into the correct layer. So that's the biped setup under the character. The next thing we're going to do is add the skin modifier to the character. Okay, so now we're going to add skin to the character. So I'm going to right click and unfreeze all. I'm going to select the character, and in the modify panel we're going to add the skin modifier. The skin modifier needs to be below Turbo Smooth in the stack, just above Editable Poly. So once we've added the skin modifier, we're going to add bones. So I'm going to click on Add, and we're going to add all the biped bones, but we're going to remove by holding Control. We'll remove BIP 001. We'll remove footsteps, the head, left clavicle, neck, and right clavicle. And you're going to hit select. And now if you rotate part of the biped, the character mesh sticks to it. But you can see we need to adjust the envelopes on the skin. So I'm going to hit undo. So to test the skin, the first thing we'll do is set up a couple of poses on the biped so we can test how the skin's deforming at all the joints. So I'm going to freeze the character again for a minute. Select the biped, and if you have footsteps showing, deselect footsteps. Go to the motion panel. So now we're going to take the character out of figure mode, and we're going to turn on auto key, and I still have all the biped pieces selected. And under the key info tab at frame 0, we're going to click set key. So this is going to set a key on all the bones on the biped. So now I'm going to scrub to frame 10. I'm going to select the upper arm, and I'm just going to bend it up as far as his arm would be able to bend. So now I have an animation on the arm that I can test the way the skin is deforming around the shoulder. So I'll go to frame 20, and I'll copy frame 0 by holding shift and dragging that key to frame 20. That makes a copy of the frame at, or the key at frame 0. So then from 20 to 30, I'll select the forearm, and I'll bend the forearm something like that. So now from 20 to 30, the forearm bends. So I'll go to frame 40, and I'll copy the key from 20 by holding shift and dragging. And then at frame 50, we could bend the hand so we can check the wrist. And frame 60, I'll copy the key from frame 40. And then at frame 70, I'm going to check the rest of the hand and the thumb. So something like that. So at frame 80, I'm going to make sure I have both thumb joints and these hand joints, or these finger joints, selected, and I'll copy frame 60 to frame 80. So I'm going to turn off auto key, open up the layer manager, and hide the biped. And I'm going to unfreeze the character and select the character and go back to the modify panel, and under skin I'm going to turn on edit envelopes. When I click edit envelopes, you can see all these lines here, and there's a point on each end of each line. So these are the envelopes, and there's an envelope for each bone on the biped. So when I click on an envelope, and I'm going to just select the character and take the character and hit Alt X, take him back out of see-through mode, and go back to skin. So when I click on an envelope, you can see I have an inner capsule, which is bright red, and an outer capsule, which is kind of burgundy. And then you can see, just like with soft selection, you can see the fall off color from bright red, and that falls off to blue and out to nothing. So this represents the weight value of the vertices that this envelope is affecting. And if I scroll down and open up the weight tool, you can see the weight value from 0 to 1. So 0 would be no color, 0.1 would be blue, 0.25 would be yellow, and all the way up to 1, which is the strongest, would be red. So the first thing you want to do is go around the character and check all the envelopes. When I look at this envelope here, I can see this is the spine link, and it should only be really affecting the body area. But you can see it's clearly affecting the arms and legs quite a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the outer capsule. So you can see as I bring in the outer capsule towards the inner capsule, the weight comes off of the arms and legs. And I can bring that inner capsule out so that it's affecting more of the body. So I can also select either end of the envelope itself. So if I grab this point, I can pull that side of the envelope up. Same with the other end, I could pull this side up or down. I just want to try to make sure that the envelopes are covering enough of the body, but not affecting too much of the arms or legs. So I'm going to go around starting with the arms, and I'm just going to start to adjust. Most of the envelopes you're going to need to bring in the outer capsule to tighten this up. So that's probably the first thing you're going to want to do when you're adjusting your envelopes. Okay, so I've gone through each bone on the arm, all the way out to the fingers and the thumb. And I've adjusted the outer capsules so that they're mostly affecting the appropriate bone. So the next step would be to go through each animation. So here I'm testing the shoulder. So I'm going to start from the shoulder, and then I'll go out to the elbow, and then all the other joints to the end. Yeah, this is where I can turn my Turbo Smooth back on and see how this is deforming with the smooth mesh. So here I can go through and tweak the envelopes as much as I can to try and get this area to deform properly. So I can grab the end of the envelope and I can switch this to local, and I can push and pull that envelope along the arm, and I can grab the outer capsules and try to adjust this envelope until the arm is deforming the way I want it to, or as close as I can get it. So that's not too bad. And then I'll check the elbow. So that's from frame 20 to 30. So here you can see it's collapsing pretty badly. So I'm going to select this point of the envelope and pull the envelope back away from the elbow. So I'll go between this envelope and this forearm. So I'm going from the upper envelope, or the upper arm envelope, to the forearm envelope. And I'm just pulling these envelopes away from each other to start. And you can see as I pull that forearm envelope away, it affects less of the bicep. And then I could also bring this outer capsule in and bring the inner capsule out. So that keeps a strong hold on the forearm section, but affects the bicep and the upper arm less. So same thing with the upper arm. I'm just going to take this outer capsule and move it in, so it's affecting less of the forearm. So later on, if I want to, I can come back to this elbow and I can manually assign weights to the vertices, try and get this elbow to point out. But we'll come back to that later. After we've done everything we can with the envelopes, we'll come back and manually set some weights on the vertices. So I'm moving down to the hand, I'm checking the wrist. You can see I'm going to want to pull this forearm envelope back. And bring some of the weight away from the hand. And then I'll check the hand envelope. And I'll bring the inner and outer capsule out, away from the forearm. And I'm also going to select that point on the envelope and bring the envelope away. So I'll just carry on through all the joints, down through the digits of the hand. Okay, so once you're done adjusting the envelopes for the arm, you're going to go through and do the exact same thing for the legs. So you're going to start by freezing your character mesh. You're going to go to Manage Layers and unhide the biped. And we're going to turn on Auto Key and set frames for each part of the leg that we want to test. So for the leg, I pretty much just rotate everything at frame 10. And you can scrub back and forth between frame 0 and 10 to test the leg. So I'll turn off Auto Key, open up my Layer Manager and hide the biped. Unfreeze your character and go back into Skin and adjust the envelopes for the leg the same way you did with the arm. So I'm only doing half of the character because Skin also has a mirror mode. So since our character is symmetrical, we can use mirror mode to copy and paste the information from one side to the other. And we'll do that after. So once you've gone as far as you can with the envelopes, the next thing to do would be to manually set the weights on the skin. So to do this, I'm going to go back into the skin modifier, and I'm going to turn off Turbo Smooth, and I'll just have a look at the leg envelope here. So if you scroll down and find the little wrench, it's called the weight tool. If you open up the weight tool, here you can see we've got a set of numbers that we can assign different weights to the vertices. So to do that, you have to make sure you have vertices turned on at the top. Now you can see this is all active. And now I can select individual vertices by holding Control. And I could use the plus and minus on the set weight to increase or decrease the amount of weight being assigned to these selected vertices. So I can turn my Turbo Smooth back on and just toggle Turbo Smooth on and off to see the vertices you're trying to select. So this will give more control over how these areas are creasing. So I can just go through and check all the joints and make sure everything's deforming properly. And if I need to, I can go in and manually set weights to have more control over how each envelope is pulling on the vertices in that section. And where this will be really handy is if you have fingers on your character and you need to go in and control how the knuckles are bending. Like, let's check the thumb. So you can fix this crease in here if I remove the weight from that part of the hand that this thumb envelope is affecting. So I've removed weight from that vertice off all the other envelopes and added more to this digit on the hand here, and that's pulled it out. To straighten that section up. So you can also use the numbers here to set the weights. So I could set the weight to 0.5 or 0.1. You can see it's blue, 0.5 is orange, and 1 would be red. So that's not too bad, that's good enough for this character. So once you're done setting your weights on the skin, the next thing to do is to mirror the weights from one side to the other. So what we're going to do is select the character, go under envelope, and we're going to go down to mirror mode. And you can see the half we were working on is green, the other half was blue. So we're going to click on paste green to blue bones and paste green to blue verts. So now when you rotate your biped or animate the other side of the character, all the work we did on this side was copied over to this side. So everything bends properly. Now you should be able to animate them.